9 months after my wife's funeral, I was stunned to hear her familiar voice ordering food at a fast food restaurant. When she turned around, everything from her posture to the distinctive double mole on the back of her hand perfectly matched my late wife. Trembling, I followed her car all the way to a suburban house. There I watched in absolute shock as a man stepped outside and wrapped his arms around her. What I discovered next made my heart stop beating. Welcome back to Revenge Dad. Before the story continues, leave a comment for me and let me know. Are you listening in the morning, afternoon, or late at night? Your comments mean more to me than you might think. Just a heads up, certain details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message it carries. For 9 months I bowed my head before an urn of ashes every morning at 6 whispering words to a woman who wasn't there. The altar sat in my living room in Summerlin, a small table with a white cloth Eleanor had embroidered years ago. Her urn rested in the center polished brass, catching the first light through the window. Beside it, a photograph Eleanor at 53, smiling in front of our first successful restoration project, a 1967 Mustang we'd sold for twice what I'd expected. Every morning, I lit the candle. Every morning, I spoke to her. Eleanor, I miss you. 3 words. The same 3 words for 270 days. I remembered the funeral like it was filmed through gauze. Arthur Pendleton's hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm, his voice low in my ear. She's at peace now, Raymond. She's at peace. Julia had sobbed so hard she couldn't stand leaning against the wall in her black dress. When I'd asked about opening the urn later, some part of me needed proof, needed to see Julia, had looked at me with red eyes and said, "It's better if we don't open it, Dad. Trust me." So I didn't. I trusted her. At 5:45, I locked my front door and drove through pre-dawn Las Vegas to Industrial Road, where I'd opened Vance Auto Repair and Restoration every morning at 6 for 34 years. The city looked different in that gray hour before sunrise, quieter, emptier, like the whole world was holding its breath. The shop sat between a tire distributor and a closed-down transmission place, a low building with garage bays and a small office I'd built with my own hands in 1991. I unlocked the front gate, then the main door, then flipped the lights. Fluorescent tubes buzzed to life, overhead, washing everything in cold white light. The smell hit me the way it always did. Engine oil metal shavings, the particular sweetness of brake fluid, the ghost of old paint thinner. Familiar. Safe. For 34 years, this place had been my second language. Now, it was my only one. I moved through the shop like I was underwater. Checked the schedule Frank had written on the whiteboard, 3 restorations in progress, 2 tune-ups scheduled, 1 transmission rebuild. Walked past the 1972 Chevelle we'd been working on for 6 months, its engine partially disassembled on the workbench. Everything was exactly where it should be. Everything ran like clockwork, because I wasn't running it anymore. For 9 months, I'd let Frank Harrison manage everything. The books, the clients, the schedules, the invoices. I showed up, I turned wrenches, I went home. I didn't ask questions, I didn't check the accounts. I worked on the cars in front of me until my hands were black with grease, and my mind was too tired to think about the urn waiting in my living room. How long does grief last when you don't know it's built on lies? I didn't know the answer. I only knew that work was the one thing that still made sense. An engine either ran or it didn't. A transmission either shifted or it ground. There was no ambiguity in metal and oil, no room for the kind of emptiness that opened up in my chest every time I looked at Eleanor's photograph. I'd built this business from a $5,000 loan, and a dream about restoration work, about bringing broken things back to beauty. 34 years, hundreds of cars, thousands of parts cataloged and ordered and installed, a reputation in Las Vegas for quality work, for honest pricing, for treating classic cars like they deserve to be treated. Now I just moved through it like a ghost. At 6:30, Frank Harrison walked into my small office corner carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was 72, with thick gray hair and hands that had turned wrenches almost as long as mine. He'd been with me for 18 years, the longest-serving mechanic I'd ever employed, the closest thing I had to a friend who wasn't family. He set 1 cup on my desk without speaking the way he did every morning. Careful, gentle, like approaching a wounded animal. "You sleep at all last night, Ray?" he asked. I picked up the coffee. It was already prepared the way I liked it, cream no sugar. "Same as always." "His shop's running fine," Frank said. "Don't worry about nothing." I nodded. He stood there for another moment, and I noticed what I'd been noticing for months, but hadn't had the energy to question the look in his eyes. worried, watchful, the expression of someone who sees something wrong but doesn't know how to say it or doesn't want to say it, or has decided saying it would do more harm than good. It wasn't pity in his face. It wasn't sympathy. It was something closer to guilt. Thanks, Frank," I said. He nodded and walked back toward the workshop floor, his boots heavy on the concrete. A mechanic knows when something's broken, you either fix it or you learn to work around it. I'd been working around a hole in my chest for 9 months, and everyone around me had learned to work around me the same way. Don't ask too many questions. Don't push too hard. Don't make Ray think about what he's lost. But Frank's eyes held something I couldn't name. Not pity, not sympathy. Something deeper and more uncomfortable. The look of a man who knows a secret he wishes he didn't. I'd seen that look before. At the funeral, standing by Eleanor's closed casket, I'd caught glimpses of it on other faces. Julia's quick glances toward Arthur, Arthur's careful hand on my shoulder. The way people spoke in low voices and stopped talking when I came near. At the time, I'd been too deep in grief to wonder why. Too numb to ask questions. Too broken to see anything except the fact that Eleanor was gone, and I was alone, and nothing would ever be right again. But Frank had worn that same expression every single morning for 9 months. The look of a man who knows something is wrong, but has chosen silence over truth. I watched him walk back to the Chevelle, watched him pick up a socket wrench and lean over the engine. Watched him disappear into the work, the way I'd been disappearing into it for 270 days. By noon that day, I'd understand what Frank had been trying not to see. At noon, I told Frank I was going for lunch. He just nodded, that worried look still in his eyes. I heard my dead wife's voice ordering food at the counter 3 feet from where I stood. The fast food restaurant on East Flamingo Road was the same one I'd been going to for 15 years. I walked in, joined the line at the left counter, 6 people ahead of me. Then I heard her voice from the next counter over. "No, that's not what I need. I asked for the grilled chicken, not fried." That tone, that particular edge of frustration Eleanor used when someone wasn't listening to her. I'd heard it 10,000 times in 34 years of marriage. The exact pitch, the exact rhythm. My hand froze on my wallet. "Eleanor," I whispered. The woman was facing away from me, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, medium height, blue jacket. The cashier apologized, started remaking her order. She shifted her weight the way Eleanor always did when waiting, left foot forward, right hand resting on her hip. Then she reached for the new bag. Afternoon light came through the window behind her, harsh Nevada brightness, making details unnaturally sharp. She extended her right hand for the receipt. On the back of her right hand, just below the knuckles, 2 moles sat side by side, dark against pale skin, one slightly larger than the other. A double mole I had traced with my thumb 10,000 times over 34 years. A birthmark as unmistakable as a fingerprint. My brain screamed impossible. My eyes confirmed certainty. The woman turned toward the exit profile, visible for 3 seconds. Eleanor's nose, Eleanor's jawline, Eleanor's forward-leaning walk like she was always in a hurry. She walked past me, 6 feet away, eyes on her phone, didn't see me, frozen by the opposite counter. The glass door swung shut behind her. I ran. Abandoned the line, pushed through the door into the parking lot. The woman walked 3 rows over toward a white Ford sedan. I ran to my Silverado, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. Got the door open, started the engine as the white Ford backed out. She pulled onto East Flamingo, heading east. I followed. 3 cars back, close enough to keep her in sight, far enough she wouldn't notice a silver Silverado. My hands gripped the wheel knuckles white. Autopilot driving while my mind screamed questions that had no answers. Eleanor is dead. I went to her funeral. Arthur put his hand on my shoulder and told me she was at peace. Julia sobbed so hard she couldn't stand. I have her ashes in an urn on my altar. I light a candle for her every morning. How does the brain process impossible? It doesn't. It freezes. It fragments. It follows a white Ford down East Flamingo Road while screaming silent questions no one can answer. 30 minutes. The road changed from commercial to residential. We crossed into Henderson middle-class neighborhoods with desert landscaping and tile roofs. The Ford slowed, turned right onto a residential street. Then it pulled into a driveway. I drove past, pulled over 4 houses, down killed the engine. The woman who looked exactly like my dead wife got out carrying 2 shopping bags. She walked toward the front door, keys in hand. The door opened before she reached it. Arthur Pendleton walked out. My oldest friend. 60 years of friendship that had survived everything. Arthur, the Clark County forensic pathologist who had handled Eleanor's body after she died. Arthur, who stood beside me at the funeral with his hand on my shoulder, telling me she was at peace. He wore a polo shirt and khakis, casual, at home. He put his arm around Eleanor's shoulder. Naturally, easily, familiarly. The way you touch someone you've touched 1,000 times before. Eleanor leaned into him, laughing at something he said. They walked into the house together. The door closed. I sat in my truck. March heat built in the cab, turning it into an oven. I didn't move, just sat there watching that beige house where my dead wife lived, with my best friend, the man who had signed her death certificate, the man who had helped me plan her funeral. A mechanic knows when something is broken beyond repair. You can see it in the metal, the way a crack runs too deep, the way a part has been stressed past its limits. Sitting in that truck, watching my best friend embrace my dead wife, I knew my entire life was that broken thing. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. The heat became unbearable, then somehow bearable again, the way pain becomes bearable when you stop fighting it. I sat there until sunset, painted the Henderson sky, orange and purple, until the engine ticked as it cooled, until two questions formed in my mind, with the cold precision of a man who has spent his life building things with his hands. If Eleanor is alive, who did I bury 9 months ago? And how long has Arthur known she wasn't in that coffin? I drove past my house without slowing down. I couldn't face that urn, not yet. Not with Eleanor alive in Henderson and Arthur's arm around her shoulder, and those two questions burning holes in my brain. The shop's accounting system loaded at 11:47 that night, blue glow filling the dark office, and with it came the third betrayal. I'd unlocked the shop in darkness, walked past the silent garage bays to my office corner. The coffee from this morning still sat on my desk, cold and forgotten. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the desk lamp, just the computer screen. I opened the accounting software for the first time since June 2024. 9 months. The month Eleanor died. The login credentials still worked. Password I'd created years ago. Eleanor1987, the year we got married. My fingers typed it automatically, muscle memory, from 1,000 logins before grief made me stop caring about numbers. The dashboard loaded. Business checking account, balance $180.43. I stared at that number. Vance Auto Repair and Restoration had generated between $30,000 and $50,000 monthly for the past decade. Even with expenses, payroll, parts orders, the account should never drop below $50,000. That was the buffer, the safety net. The emergency fund for when a client didn't pay on time, or equipment broke down, or the Nevada heat killed another air conditioning unit. $180. I clicked to the joint savings account Eleanor and I had maintained for 34 years. Balance $340.12. In June 2024, that account had held $4.8 million. Our retirement, our security. Money from selling the first 2 branch locations, from decades of careful saving, from the appreciation of Las Vegas real estate we'd invested in, back when the city was half the size it is now. It's $340. I clicked through the transaction history, months of transfers scrolling past, large amounts, regular withdrawals, money moving out in increments small enough not to trigger automatic bank alerts, but large enough to empty accounts in 9 months. Then I found the document, a PDF, attached to a transaction dated June 15, 2024, 5 days before Eleanor's funeral. Power of attorney. I clicked it open. Legal document, 3 pages dense text. Standard boilerplate language about capacity and authority and revocation. My eyes skipped to the relevant section. Raymond Vance hereby grants Julia Marie Vance daughter full power of attorney over all business assets, real estate holdings, financial accounts, and legal decisions regarding Vance Auto Repair and Restoration and all subsidiary holdings. This power extends to account transfers, property sales, contract negotiations, and business dissolution. Dated June 15, 2024. Signed by Raymond Vance, except I'd never signed it. I pulled open my desk drawer, found my spare checkbook, the one I kept for the rare times I wrote personal checks anymore. Flipped it open to a check I'd written 2 weeks ago for the electric bill. Held it under the desk lamp next to the PDF on the screen. My signature has a particular hook on the R, a way the tail of the E curves back under itself, a compression of the final letters when I'm writing fast. 34 years of signing checks and invoices and tax returns, the signature becomes as unique as a fingerprint. The signature on the power of attorney was close, very close. Someone had studied it, practiced it, gotten the major elements right. But the R was slightly too straight. The E didn't curve quite far enough, and the compression at the end was too deliberate, too careful. Forged. Someone had forged my signature 5 days before Eleanor's funeral, giving Julia complete control over everything I'd built. A mechanic trusts numbers because numbers don't lie the way people do. Numbers show what happened, when it happened, who made it happen. The numbers were showing me 9 months of theft while I knelt before an urn of lies. I clicked deeper into the branch records. North Las Vegas location. The second shop I'd opened in 1998 specializing in classic car restoration. Sold August 2024 for $2.1 million. Buyer Commercial Real Estate Investment Group. Check deposited to the joint account, then transferred out in increments over the following 3 weeks. Henderson location. The third shop opened 2007, focusing on high-end European imports. Sold October 2024 for $1.9 million. Same pattern, deposit, incremental transfers, money disappearing like water through a cracked pipe. I opened the detailed transaction log. Joint savings account. June 2024, $4.8 million. Current balance, $340. Total. Transferred out $4,799,660. Business checking. June 2024, $3.7 million. Current balance, $180. Total transferred $3,699,820. Branch sales $4 million total. Grand total missing $12.5 million. Every transaction over 9 months. Every transfer, every sale, every withdrawal. Methodically draining 34 years of work, while I bowed my head to an urn each morning and worked on engines with hands that didn't know how to stop moving. Tracing the money was like following oil leaks. Start at the stain, follow it back to the source. Every trail ended at the same name. Every single transaction showed the same authorized signer. Julia Vance, chief accountant. My daughter. The one I'd trusted to manage the books while I grieved. The one I'd taught about business when she was 16, showing her how to read balance sheets and track inventory and manage cash flow. The one who'd cried at Eleanor's funeral so hard she couldn't stand leaning against the wall in her black dress while I stood numb beside a closed coffin. Julia. Her name appeared 273 times in the transaction log. Authorized signer, approved transfer, confirmed sale. Her digital fingerprints on every piece of the theft, methodical and deliberate and thorough. Eleanor was alive in Henderson. Arthur had his arm around her like they'd done it 1,000 times. And Julia had orchestrated the theft of everything I'd built while pretending to grieve with me. I sat back in my chair, the office silent, except for the hum of the computer fan. Julia, my daughter, the one who'd sobbed at the funeral while her mother stood alive in Henderson, and her girlfriend. I froze at that thought. Chloe Bennett, Julia's girlfriend. 26 years old, worked in tech support somewhere in the city. She'd visited the shop twice in the past month, both times in the late afternoon, both times looking uncomfortable. Stood in the office doorway making small talk, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything, her eyes never quite meeting mine. That discomfort was about to make sense. I didn't sleep. Stayed at the shop running the numbers again, tracing the patterns, trying to understand how my daughter had orchestrated the theft while I knelt before an urn each morning. Chloe Bennett knocked on my office door at 9 that morning, carrying a question she didn't know was evidence. Uncle Ray, Julia's girlfriend. I'd met her maybe 3 times in 2 years, brief introductions, polite small talk. 26 years old, worked in tech support, downtown, dark hair, usually in a ponytail, quiet presence that didn't demand attention. She stood in my doorway, looking uncomfortable, like she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Come in, I said. She stepped inside, but didn't sit. Hands in her jacket pockets, eyes not quite meeting mine. Is something wrong? She asked. I know that's a weird question, but something feels off lately. I saw some things on Julia's computer at home. I wasn't snooping, I swear. Her email was open, and I saw international money transfer orders. I don't understand them, but the numbers seemed really big. What kind of orders? I kept my voice controlled, calm. To places like Paraguay, I think. Maybe other countries too. The amounts were in the millions. I tried to ask Julia once, but she got defensive and said it was business stuff I wouldn't understand. Paraguay. My hands stayed flat on the desk. Didn't betray the fact that this 26-year-old woman had just confirmed something I hadn't even known to look for. When did you see these? A few weeks ago? Maybe a month? I've been thinking about it ever since, wondering if I should say something. I didn't want to cause problems, but it felt wrong. You did the right thing coming here. Thank you. The relief on her face was immediate and genuine. She'd been carrying this weight not knowing what it meant, but feeling the wrongness of it. Thanks, Uncle Ray. I'll let you get back to work. She left, closing the door quietly. I sat alone, morning sun coming through the window, showing every streak of dust in the air, and processed what I'd just been given. The innocent make the best witnesses because they don't know they're testifying. Chloe had handed me proof without understanding. She just confirmed my daughter was planning to disappear to South America. I turned back to the computer, opened the wire transfer records I'd been too focused on domestic accounts to check last night. There. I added them up. $3.2 million. Moved in careful increments over 7 months to an offshore account in a country with lax financial disclosure laws. Julia and Eleanor's escape plan. Take the money, fake a death, wait for grief to blind everyone, then disappear to South America where extradition is complicated and money talks louder than justice. I was still staring at the screen when Frank Harrison entered an hour later. He didn't knock, just walked in and closed the door with deliberate care that meant he'd been working up courage. He sat in the chair across from my desk without being asked, hands still black with grease from whatever engine he'd been working on. I saw things, Ray, he said. No preamble. Over these months, things that didn't sit right. What things? Julia. Late hours when she didn't need to be here. Phone calls behind closed doors, speaking so quiet I couldn't hear. Bringing strangers in to review shop files, said they were consultants, but for what? She changed vehicle registrations on 3 project cars last October, moved them to some LLC I'd never heard of. When I asked, she said, "You'd approved it." I didn't approve anything. I know that now. Frank's voice was rough. I thought something was wrong back then, too. But you were hurting so much, Ray. Every morning you came in looking like you hadn't slept. Every afternoon you worked until your hands bled. You were drowning in grief, and I thought if I brought you more problems, more questions. He stopped, rubbed his face with those greasy hands. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was protecting you. When does loyalty become complicity? When does protection become blindness? Frank thought he was being kind. Instead, he'd helped them steal 9 months I could have used to stop this. And that look, I said, every morning, the guilt in your eyes. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. And I didn't want to hurt you more than you were already hurting. I looked at Frank, 72 years old, hands still black with grease from honest work eyes, full of regret. For silence he thought was kindness. Then I thought about Chloe walking out, relieved that someone had finally listened to her instinct. Everyone around me had pieces of the truth they were too afraid or too kind to speak. Frank saw Julia's suspicious behavior. Chloe saw the international transfers. Both sat on information that could have stopped this months ago, because they thought protecting me from pain was more important than protecting me from theft. I needed someone who dealt in truth professionally, someone who wouldn't shield me from it, someone who would follow every ugly thread no matter where it led. I needed a private investigator. That evening I stood before the altar and saw the urn not as sacred remains, but as evidence of a crime. The living room was dark except for the candle I'd lit this morning before going to the shop. It had burned down to a stub wax pooling at the base. Eleanor's photograph sat beside the urn, the way it had for 9 months, her face caught mid-smile in that moment I'd thought was real. I'd knelt here every morning at 6, lit the candle, whispered the same 3 words. Eleanor, I miss you. All of it performance, all of it worship to a lie. Arthur had stood beside me at the funeral with his hand on my shoulder, voice low and soothing, telling me Eleanor was at peace. He'd known she was alive, probably helped plan it, probably signed whatever death certificate needed. Signing used his position as a forensic pathologist to make the paperwork look legitimate, while Eleanor walked around Henderson with a new name. Julia had sobbed so hard she couldn't stand, leaned against the wall in her black dress while I stood numb beside a closed coffin. She'd been crying over a conspiracy, not a death. Grieving the theft she was already planning, not the mother who stood alive somewhere planning her own disappearance. I looked at the urn, polished brass catching candlelight. Who was in there? Whose ashes had I been bowing to every morning for 270 days? I reached for Eleanor's photograph. Heavy silver frame I'd bought at a gallery in Henderson 5 years ago. Picked it up, looked at her face one more time. That smile. The one I'd thought I knew for 34 years. The one I'd traced with my eyes 10,000 times, memorizing the exact curve of her lips, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was genuinely happy versus when she was performing happiness for someone else. I thought I could tell the difference. I laid the photograph face down on the altar. Deliberate motion. Final motion. The sound it made against the wood was soft, but absolute. For the first time in 9 months, the urn sat without her image watching over it. There's a moment in every repair job where assessment ends and work begins. You stop looking at what's broken and start planning how to fix it. Laying Eleanor's photo face down was the moment grief time was over. Work time had started. I didn't blow out the candle, just walked away from the altar and left it burning. The next morning I searched online. Private Investigator Las Vegas. Dozens of results. Websites with stock photos of people in sunglasses, promises of discretion, and results marketing copy about cheating spouses and background checks. Then I found a listing with no stock photos, just simple text. Leo Martinez Investigations, Fremont Street address, 30 years, LVMP die, discreet, effective. I called the number. It rang twice before a rough voice answered. Martinez. I need help, I said. They all do. Come by at 2. He hung up. At 2 that afternoon, I drove downtown to an address on Fremont Street, a block off the main tourist corridor. Second floor of a building that looked like it had been there since the Rat Pack era. Narrow stairs. Hallway that smelled like old carpet and air conditioning that didn't quite work. The door said Leo Martinez Investigations in faded gold lettering. Inside a small office, 1 desk, 2 filing cabinets, window with dusty Venetian blinds. The whole space smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long and 3 decades of other people's secrets. Leo Martinez sat behind the desk, 55 years old, reading glasses perched on his nose while he reviewed a file. Short-sleeved shirt, no tie, thick forearms. The kind of build that said he'd spent years on the street before ending up behind this desk. He looked up when I entered. Raymond Vance? Yes. Sit. I sat in the chair across from his desk. The desk was piled with folders, loose papers, a coffee mug with the LVMPD logo, a stapler that looked older than me. Leo Martinez's office smelled like 30 years of other people's secrets. I was about to add mine to the pile, but unlike the others who came here broken, I was coming here to break back. What do you need? Leo asked. I need to find out everything about someone, I said, then corrected myself. My dead spouse, except she's not dead. Leo leaned back in his chair. It creaked. Explain. So I did. The funeral 9 months ago. The urn I'd worshipped every morning. The voice at the fast food restaurant. The double mole I'd traced 10,000 times. Following the white Ford to Henderson. Arthur emerging from the mansion with his arm around Eleanor like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The books I hadn't checked in 9 months. The forged power of attorney. Both branch locations sold without my knowledge. The accounts drained. Julia's name on every transaction. $12.5 million gone. Chloe mentioning Paraguay. Frank confessing he'd seen suspicious behavior, but stayed silent to protect me from more pain. Leo listened without interrupting. Took notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting I couldn't read from across the desk. When I finished, he set down his pen and whistled. In 30 years of this work, I've seen a lot, he said. This tops it. Can you help? Can I help? He laughed short and sharp. Yeah, I can help. 10,000 retainer. Another 5 when I deliver the report. 1 week. 1 week. For what you're describing, I need court records, property transfers, death certificates, financial tracking. Most of it's public if you know where to look. The rest, I know people. 1 week gets you everything. I pulled out my checkbook. The business account was empty, but my personal account still had money they hadn't touched yet. Wrote the check for $10,000. Dated it. Signed it with the signature they had tried to forge and failed. Handed it to Leo. He looked at it, then at me. You sure that's a lot of money? They stole $12.5 million, I said. This is an investment. Leo took the check, filed it in a folder, wrote me a receipt. 1 week, he said. I'll call when I have something. I left Leo's office at 2:47 that afternoon, with a receipt for $10,000 and 1 week marked on the calendar. For 9 months, I'd been a man worshipping ashes and mourning lies. Now, I was a man with a private investigator, a paper trail, and enough rage to see this through to the end. In 7 days, Leo would hand me a folder that would prove everything and reveal even worse than I'd imagined. 7 days later, I walked back into Leo's office at exactly 2 in the afternoon. The folder Leo handed me was 3 inches thick and held 3 separate felonies on the first page alone. He sat behind the same cluttered desk, same coffee-stained mug, same pile of files that probably never moved. But now he had my folder, tan manila, thick enough that it had to be held with both hands labeled with a case number in black marker. Leo opened it methodically, careful, like a man who'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly how to deliver information that would destroy someone's world. In 30 years of police work and 15 private, I've never documented anything quite like this, he said. Show me everything. He turned the folder so I could see. First page photographs, color prints, high resolution, time stamped. Eleanor walking into the Henderson mansion. Eleanor getting into the white Ford sedan. Eleanor shopping at a grocery store, pushing a cart wearing sunglasses and a blue jacket I'd never seen before. Eleanor alive, healthy, moving through the world, like a normal person, living a normal life. Except she was supposed to be ashes in an urn on my living room altar. Surveillance, I asked. 3 days worth. Once you gave me the Henderson address, I watched the house. She has a routine. Grocery shopping Tuesday mornings, gym Thursday afternoons, coffee shop on Saturdays. She's not hiding. Why would I was supposed to never know? Leo flipped to the second section, property records. Henderson Mansion, purchased August 2023 by Sarah Mitchell. Cash transaction $890,000. No mortgage, no loan. Cash. He laid out more documents. Birth certificate for Sarah Mitchell, born 1978 in Reno. Social security card. Nevada driver's license with Eleanor's face, but Sarah Mitchell's name. All the documents pristine, official-looking, completely fabricated. Who created these, I asked. Document forger named Lenny Curtis. Operates out of North Las Vegas. Does birth certificates, licenses, social security cards. The Sarah Mitchell identity is his work. I'd bet my license on it. I stared at the driver's license. Eleanor's face looking back at me from a lie. The date on the birth certificate caught my eye. This says 2023. That's right, August 2023. The Sarah Mitchell identity existed a full year before Eleanor's death. A year. Not a desperate plan thrown together after a crisis. Not an impulsive decision made in grief or fear. They'd been planning this for a year minimum. Eleanor had become Sarah Mitchell in August 2023. Bought a house. Established a life. Built a complete false identity while still married to me. Still living in our Summerlin home. Still sharing our bed. Documents don't lie the way people do. Every piece of paper Leo handed me was another nail in the coffin, ironic phrase given I'd been mourning the wrong person for 9 months. Leo flipped to the medical records section. Arthur Pendleton's signature, he said, pointing to a death certificate. Eleanor Vance died June 20th, 2024. Cause of death listed as cardiac arrest, following complications from pneumonia. I looked at Arthur's signature, bold, confident, the signature of a man with authority. The same signature I'd seen on birthday cards and Christmas notes for 60 years of friendship. Emergency cremation authorization. Leo continued showing me another document. Signed same day. Cites risk of infectious disease requiring immediate disposal of remains. Clark County Medical Examiner rubber-stamped Arthur's recommendation without independent verification. Why? Because Arthur Pendleton is a senior forensic pathologist with 30 years of credibility. Nobody questions him. Emergency cremation bypasses standard protocols, and once the body's cremated, DNA verification becomes impossible. Arthur used his position, I said, not a question, a statement, perfectly. He knew exactly which rules to exploit and which officials would trust him without asking questions. Perfect crime from inside the system. Leo placed the final section on the desk. The woman who actually died, he said quietly. I looked down at the page. Marilyn Cross, age 67, homeless. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, no permanent address. Died June 18th, 2024, in hospice care at Desert Springs Medical Center, the facility where Arthur works part-time. 2 days later, cremated under the name Eleanor Vance. Marilyn Cross, I said. The name felt strange in my mouth. That's who I buried. That's who you buried. 67 years old, terminal cancer, died in hospice with no family present. Arthur had access to her body, had access to the crematorium, had the authority to sign the paperwork. 2 days after Marilyn died, she became Eleanor's ashes. Who was Marilyn Cross? What did she like? Did she have favorite songs, favorite foods, people who loved her? Besides a niece who took $50,000 to forget she existed. I'd been bowing to her ashes every morning, whispering to her, grieving for her without knowing her name. She had one living relative, Leo said, niece named Nadia Cross, 24 years old, works retail at a store in Henderson. He paused, looked at me directly. Nadia received a $50,000 wire transfer from an account controlled by Julia Vance on June 25, 2024, 1 week after Marilyn died. I stared at the bank transfer record Leo placed in front of me, clean white paper with black numbers, account number, transfer amount $50,000, date June 25, 2024, authorization signature Julia M. Vance. My daughter hadn't just orchestrated the theft. She'd paid Marilyn Cross's niece $50,000 to stay silent about selling her dead aunt's body. Nadia knows, I said. Nadia knows everything. She knows her aunt died in hospice. She knows someone cremated the body under a different name. And she knows Julia Vance paid her $50,000 not to ask questions about it. $50,000 to Nadia Cross. I stared at that bank transfer record, Julia's signature clear at the bottom. My daughter hadn't just helped steal my money, she'd paid someone to stay silent about buying a corpse. And if Nadia decided $50,000 wasn't enough to keep that secret, everything could unravel before I could act. Leo wasn't finished. His hand moved to turn to the next section of the folder. There's more, he said. Leo turned to the next section of the folder. 200 phone calls, over 9 months each one, a conversation between my daughter and my dead wife that I was never meant to know existed. Leo placed a thick printout on the desk. Call records, pages and pages of numbers, timestamps, durations. The kind of documentation that takes court orders and subpoenas and weeks of bureaucratic patience to obtain. 200 calls, Leo said. I stared at the numbers. Julia's cell phone number at the top of every page. Below it, a series of different international numbers, country codes I didn't immediately recognize. None of them repeated more than a dozen times. Julia called Eleanor 200 times while I thought Eleanor was dead, I said. Statement, not question. Worse, look at the timestamps. Leo pulled out a yellow highlighter, started marking specific entries. His hand moved with practiced precision, the motion of a man who'd done this kind of document review thousands of times in interrogation rooms and courtrooms. June 2024 to March 2025. 9 months of calls spread across the timeline. Some brief 30 seconds, 45 seconds, probably just check-ins. Others lengthy, 7 minutes, 12 minutes, 23 minutes on one call in November. Strategy sessions, planning meetings, updates. The numbers changed every 10 to 14 days. Paraguay 1 week, Cayman Islands the next. Panama. After that, then back to Paraguay. Different providers, different routing, different digital fingerprints. Professional operational security, Leo said. Not amateur cover-up. Burner SIM cards switched every 2 weeks. International routing to make tracking harder. This is more sophisticated than most criminal operations I tracked at LVMPD. They were careful. They were professional. Now look at these specific dates. Leo pointed to the highlighted entries. I remembered that night. Arthur had come over to check on me. Brought pizza because he knew I wasn't cooking for myself anymore. Sat in my living room until 9 talking about old times. Telling me grief takes as long as it takes, I shouldn't rush it. Kind words. Concerned friend. 90 minutes after he'd left my house, Julia called Eleanor. October the 3rd, 2024. Call at 10:15 p.m. Duration 4 minutes. Arthur had visited that night too. Later visit stayed until 9:30. Talked about potentially selling one of the branch locations if I needed liquid capital. Said he could connect me with a good real estate agent. Helpful advice. Supportive friend. 45 minutes after he left, Julia called Eleanor. November 8th, 2024. 3 calls that day, 11:23 a.m., 3:47 p.m., 9:52 p.m. I didn't remember what happened on November 8th specifically, but I knew what the pattern meant. September 12th, October, 3rd November 8th. These match nights Arthur visited you, Leo said. Julia called Eleanor right after he left, every time. They were coordinating around me, in real time. More professional than most operations I tracked in 30 years. Arthur would visit comfort you plant suggestions about selling assets or taking certain actions. Then Julia would call Eleanor with updates, what you'd said, how you'd reacted, what move to make next. How do you run a conspiracy when one conspirator is supposed to be dead? 200 phone calls, burner SIM cards switched every 14 days, international routing through 3 countries. The answer, very carefully. Arthur sat in my living room, offering sympathy. Julia worked in my shop office managing the books I couldn't bear to check. Eleanor waited in Henderson for updates. Perfect triangulation, perfect manipulation. Each piece of the machine moving in synchronized precision while I knelt before an urn every morning. This wasn't improvised, I said. No, this was planned, executed, and maintained with military precision over 9 months. They didn't make mistakes. They coordinated every move. Leo flipped to the final page in the section. Different document, bank records. In last piece, he said, Paraguay. Banco Nacional del Paraguay, Asunción Branch. Account opened October 2024 under the name Sarah Eleanor Mitchell, not Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Eleanor Mitchell. Eleanor's legal alias with her middle name added. I scanned the account details, signatories, access rights, beneficiaries. Eleanor's name only, not Arthur's. 3.2 million, Leo said. Moved from Henderson accounts Julia helped drain, starting in October, small transfers every 2 weeks. 180,000, 220,000, 195,000. 6 months of systematic transfers totaling $3.2 million in Eleanor's private Paraguay account. Not Arthur's name, I said, understanding dawning cold and clear. She was going to disappear again. Leave him behind this time. You were the first target. Arthur was the second. A well-maintained machine runs on precision timing and coordinated parts. My family's conspiracy ran the same way Julia, calling Eleanor, while Arthur sat in my living room, each piece moving in perfect mechanical synchronization to drain my accounts and my life. But machines break when one part betrays another. Eleanor hadn't just stolen from me, she'd stolen from Arthur too, built an exit strategy to leave her second partner holding the bag when the authorities eventually came. Arthur thought they were in this together, thought they'd escape together, live together, share the money they'd stolen together. He didn't know about the Paraguay account. Leo would have found Arthur's name if he had access to it. Would have found joint signatures, shared beneficiaries, something connecting him to those transfers. But there was nothing. Just Eleanor's name, Eleanor's account, Eleanor's $3.2 million escape plan that didn't include the man who'd signed fraudulent death certificates and risked his career to help her fake her own death. Arthur doesn't know, I said. I'd bet my license he doesn't. If he did, he'd have protected himself better. Set up his own offshore accounts, created his own exit strategy. But I can't find anything under his name except his regular salary deposits and mortgage payments. I stared at that Paraguay account printout with Eleanor's name and Eleanor's name only. Arthur didn't know about this. Leo would have found his name if he did, which meant Eleanor had betrayed her co-conspirator the same way she'd betrayed me. And that meant I had something Arthur didn't, the truth about who Eleanor really was. That truth was about to become my most powerful weapon. But a weapon is only as effective as the person who knows how to use it. The next morning, Leo gave me a name, Roxanne Caldwell, criminal fraud attorney. The best he'd worked with in 30 years. Roxanne Caldwell read Leo's 3-inch report without speaking for 11 minutes, while I sat in her 10th floor office and watched my life reduced to legal documentation. The office was downtown glass and steel, the kind of building that didn't exist when I'd opened my first auto shop in 1991. 10th floor, corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Las Vegas, spreading out toward the mountains. The receptionist had shown me in with professional courtesy, offered coffee. I declined, gestured to the leather chair across from a desk that probably cost more than my first car. Roxanne Caldwell stood when I entered. 45 years old, gray suit, firm handshake, the kind of presence that said she'd stood in courtrooms and won. She took Leo's folder from my hands without small talk. Mr. Vance, Leo briefed me. Let me review his documentation. Take your time. She sat, opened the folder, started reading. I watched her face, looking for reaction, looking for something that would tell me what she was seeing in those pages. But there was nothing. Just professional assessment, eyes moving across text, occasionally pausing to reread a section, making small notes in the margins with a pen. 11 minutes. I counted them on the clock mounted on the wall behind her desk, the second hand making its slow circles while Roxanne Caldwell read about Eleanor's false identity, Arthur's medical fraud, Julia's systematic theft, Marilyn Cross's body cremated under someone else's name. My family, my life, reduced to pages in a folder. Finally, she closed it, placed it on the desk between us, looked at me directly. 3 trials worth of charges, she said. Minimum. 3. Eleanor for identity fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud wire fraud for the international transfers. Arthur for medical record, falsification, fraudulent death certification, conspiracy. Julia for embezzlement, forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy. She said it like a grocery list. Calm, professional, each charge another item to check off. Combined federal and state charges could mean 15 to 20 years prison time for Eleanor alone. Arthur faces mandatory medical license revocation plus 10 to 15 years. Julia, given her age and cooperation potential, possibly 8 to 12. 15 years, 20 years. Numbers that meant the rest of Eleanor's life. Numbers that meant Julia would be in her 50s when she got out. What do you need from me? I asked. Direct evidence. Leo's report is excellent. I've worked with him before his documentation holds up in court. But defense attorneys will challenge chain of custody question. His investigative methods create reasonable doubt about circumstantial connections. So the folder isn't enough. The folder is foundation, but we need something incontrovertible. Something a jury can hear that removes all doubt. What? A confession. Someone admitting what they did in their own words, on tape. Sitting in that office watching Roxanne reduce my family to legal charges and prison sentences, I understood something documentation doesn't care about love. Evidence doesn't forgive. The law treats betrayal like any other crime, with cold precision and appropriate consequences. Roxanne opened her desk drawer, pulled out a small device, placed it on the desk between us. It was smaller than I expected, about the size of a car key fob. Black plastic, single button, LED indicator light. Digital voice recorder, she said. Voice activated, 8-hour battery, encrypted storage that creates chain of custody timestamps. Admissible in Nevada courts with single-party consent. Single-party consent. You're allowed to record conversations you're part of without informing the other party. It's legal, it's admissible, and it's what we need. I stared at the device. Can you get someone to confess? Roxanne asked. Julia or Arthur, full admission on tape. What they did, how they did it, why they did it. Detailed enough that a defense attorney can't claim it was taken out of context or misunderstood. My daughter, I said, not answering the question, just acknowledging what she was asking. Can you do this? Record your daughter confessing to felony theft. I thought about Julia at 8 years old. Climbing up onto the hood of a 1965 Mustang, I was restoring sitting cross-legged on the warm metal, asking me how engines worked. I'd spent an hour explaining each component: carburetor, pistons, crankshaft, timing belt. She'd listened with absolute focus, absorbing every detail, asking smart questions. Why does the timing have to be so precise? She had asked. Because if one part is off, the whole system fails. Everything has to work together. That's how machines work. That's how everything works. She'd nodded, serious, understanding the lesson I was teaching about precision and consequences, and how systems break when someone doesn't do their part correctly. What kind of father wears a wire to record his daughter confessing to crimes? The kind who taught her that actions have consequences. The kind who just learned his lessons had been weaponized against him. Can you do this? Roxanne asked again. I picked up the recording device, felt its weight in my palm. Barely anything, lighter than my phone, lighter than my wallet, but the weight of what it represented was absolute. Yes, I said. Roxanne nodded once. Get her talking, ask questions that force details. Names, dates, amounts, methods. The more specific, the better. Don't lead her, let her explain it in her own words. And don't turn it off until she's gone. She slid a business card across the desk. Call me immediately after. I'll need the device within 2 hours to preserve chain of custody. Can you do that? Yes. Then we have a case. I walked out of Roxanne's office with the recording device in my breast pocket weight, barely noticeable, but presence absolute. Julia had used her position as chief accountant to steal my life's work. Now, I was going to use my position as her father to record her admission of guilt. The irony was that I'd taught her everything she knew about how systems worked: carburetor pistons, crankshaft timing, belt precision, and consequences. And now I'd use that same knowledge to dismantle her. 2 days later, I'd call Julia into the shop office with evidence she couldn't deny and a recording device she didn't know was running. 2 days of planning, 2 days choosing exactly which evidence to show and which words to say, and how to make my daughter confess to felonies while thinking I might forgive her. The recording device was running in my breast pocket when Julia walked into my office and I closed the door behind her. Monday morning, 8 o'clock. I'd arrived at the shop 2 hours early, unlocked my office, locked it again from the inside. Placed 3 photographs face down on my desk in a neat row. Surveillance photos Leo had taken. Professional quality. Time and date stamps in the corner. Eleanor entering the Henderson mansion. Eleanor with Arthur on the front porch, his hand on her lower back. Eleanor shopping at a grocery store, pushing a cart wearing sunglasses and a jacket I'd never seen. All dated March 2025. All taken while I'd been kneeling before an urn every morning. I tested the recording device one final time. Pressed the button. Watched the tiny LED indicator blink, once then, go dark. Voice activated, 8-hour battery, running. Tucked it into my breast pocket, the weight barely noticeable, the presence absolute. Unlocked the office door, walked out to the workshop floor, where Frank and 2 other mechanics were already working on the morning's first jobs. Julia stood at the far workbench, reviewing an invoice 28 years old, my only child wearing jeans, and the shop polo shirt with her dark hair pulled back the way Eleanor used to wear hers. Bonita, I said, calm voice. I need to see you in the office. Now. She looked up. Is something wrong? Close the door behind you. I walked back to the office, sat behind my desk, waited. Footsteps in the hallway. The door opened. Julia stepped inside, concern on her face, the expression of someone who doesn't know what's happening, but knows it isn't routine. Dad, what's... Close the door. She closed it, sat in the chair across from my desk. The same chair Chloe had sat in when she'd told me about Paraguay. The same chair Frank had sat in when he'd confessed to seeing things, but staying silent. Now, Julia sat there looking confused and slightly worried, but not yet afraid. I reached for the first photograph, turned it face up, slid it across the desk toward her. Eleanor entering the Henderson mansion, March 15, 2025, 2:47 p.m. Julia's face drained of color instantly. Not gradually, not in stages. All at once like someone had opened a valve and let the blood out. I turned the second photograph face up, slid it across. Eleanor with Arthur on the porch, March 18, 2025, 4:23 p.m. Julia opened her mouth to speak. I raised my hand. Silence. Third photograph, face up, across the desk. Eleanor shopping at a grocery store with Arthur, March 22, 2025, 10:15 a.m. Julia stared at the photos. 3 images of her mother, alive and healthy, and living a normal life in Henderson, while Julia had helped me mourn a fake death and worship ashes that weren't Eleanor's. Dad, I can explain. Not yet. Those aren't... Don't lie to me. Not anymore. Watching my daughter's face drain of color as she saw photos of her living mother was the moment I stopped being her father and became her prosecutor. The recording device in my pocket was the line between those 2 men, and I'd crossed it the moment I pressed record. Julia looked up from the photos, eyes wide, breathing fast. The professional mask she'd worn for 9 months while draining my accounts cracking in real time. How did you... I know everything I said. Simple statement, true statement. The Henderson mansion, Arthur, the forged power of attorney, the branch sales, all of it. Dad, please. I also know about the accounting system. I leaned forward slightly, kept my voice calm. I froze it at 6 this morning. You have no access to any files, no ability to move money, no way to cover tracks or delete records or create new documentation. Julia went even paler. Hadn't thought that was possible, but the color kept draining. You're completely trapped, I said. No escape options, no time to plan, no way out. She stared at me. Then the professional mask shattered completely. Mom approached me, she said. Words coming fast, now desperate. She said it was to protect the business from a divorce settlement. She said you'd been having an affair and she needed to secure assets before you could hide them. The power of attorney was it was supposed to be temporary, just to keep talking, I said. She kept talking. 90 seconds of explanation, Eleanor's plan, the forged signature, the branch sales Julia had facilitated, Arthur's role in the death certificate, how they'd coordinated everything around my grief, how Julia had thought she was protecting the family business. The recording device captured every word. Then I raised my hand again. Julia stopped mid-sentence. "Not here," I said. "This is the wrong place, wrong time. I want to understand everything from the beginning, but properly. Not in an office where Frank might walk in or a customer might interrupt." Julia nodded, hopeful, desperate, thinking I was offering something. "Let's have lunch," I said. "Thursday. We'll go somewhere quiet. You can explain everything. I'll listen, really listen." "You will—" "I want to understand Julia. I want to know why, but I need the whole story. Can you do that? Can you tell me everything?" "Yes," she nodded fast. "Yes, Dad, I can explain all of it. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to protect—" "Thursday," I said. "We'll talk Thursday. A good trap requires 3 elements: bait the target, wants walls they can't see, and a trigger they activate themselves. The lunch invitation was the bait. The recording device was the walls. Julia's desperation would be the trigger." She stood. "Thank you. Thank you for listening. I know this looks bad, but if you just let me explain everything—" "Thursday," I repeated. She left my office thinking I'd offered her Mercy a chance to explain, maybe even forgiveness, over lunch. She didn't know the recording device had already captured her initial confession. She didn't know Thursday's lunch would finish what Monday's confrontation started. And she definitely didn't know that the father she thought might forgive her had already given all the evidence to a prosecutor who wouldn't. Thursday at the steakhouse, I'd get everything I needed to destroy her. Thursday arrived. I reached the steakhouse 45 minutes early, chose the corner booth, tested the recording device one final time, while Julia crossed the restaurant parking lot, believing I might forgive her. The place was upscale. Strip location, white tablecloths and leather booths, and prices that made you think twice before ordering. I'd requested the quiet corner away from the kitchen noise and the main dining traffic. Sat facing the door so I could watch her arrive. Pressed the button on the recording device. Tiny LED blink. Voice activation confirmed. Battery at 100%. Encrypted storage ready. Tucked it back into my breast pocket. Ordered coffee when the server came. Declined the menu. Said I was waiting for someone. Julia arrived at 12:10. Navy blazer over a white blouse. Careful makeup. Hair pulled back professionally. She dressed for this like it was an important business meeting, trying to look respectful and competent and worthy of a second chance all at once. She crossed the restaurant, saw me in the corner. Booth managed a small, uncertain smile. Sat across from me. Ordered water when the server appeared. Looked at me with hope and terror in equal measure. "Dad, thank you for—" "Order first," I said, neutral tone. "Then we talk." She ordered the salmon. I ordered the ribeye neither of us would touch. The server left menus and promised to return with bread. Julia folded her hands on the white tablecloth, waiting. "I want to understand everything," I said. "From the very beginning. Every detail. No interruptions. Just tell me what happened and why." She took a breath, started talking. 3 years ago, she'd noticed Eleanor's credit card statements. 2 sets. One for the bills, I saw one she kept hidden. Julia had confronted her. Eleanor had admitted everything: the relationship with Arthur, the plan to leave, the certainty that Nevada divorce law would destroy me. "She said the business had more debts than you'd told me," Julia said. "Said if you divorced her creditors would take everything. She convinced me that helping her secure assets was the only way to protect you." The recording device captured every word. The power of attorney. "How many times did you practice my signature?" 2 weeks. Julia was crying now, tears running down her careful makeup. "Every night, until it looked exactly right. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." She explained the rest. North Las Vegas branch sold August 2024 for $2.1 million. Henderson branch, October, for $1.9 million. Real estate agent Victor Brennan had no idea the sales weren't authorized. Money deposited into the joint accounts, then transferred out in increments small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. 200 phone calls to Eleanor using burner SIM cards switched every 2 weeks. International routing through Paraguay, Cayman Islands, Panama. Professional operational security Julia had researched online, implemented herself. Payment to Nadia Cross. $50,000 wire, transfer 1 week after Marilyn's death. Julia had found Nadia through Arthur convinced her the money was life insurance settlement, no questions needed. The recording device doesn't understand that the voice confessing to felonies belongs to someone you've loved for 28 years. It just captures frequencies and converts them to evidence. That's what I'd become too, a machine converting my daughter's words into her own destruction. There's something else, Julia said quietly. Something Mom told me that made me afraid to say no to her. What? Her first marriage to Richard Anderson. He died in 1980, car accident they said. But Mom told me once when she was drunk that it wasn't an accident, that Richard had threatened to leave her and take everything, and she couldn't let that happen. I stared at my daughter across the white tablecloth. She killed him. I don't know, maybe she was just talking, but the way she said it, I was scared, Dad. Scared that if you found out the truth and tried to divorce her, she might. I thought if I helped her leave quietly, you'd be safe. The server brought our steaks, set them down, asked if we needed anything else. We both shook our heads. Julia kept talking, every detail, every transaction, every lie she'd told me over 9 months while I'd mourned. How Arthur had coordinated visits to my house with Julia's phone calls to Eleanor reporting what I'd said, how I'd reacted, what move to make next. How Julia had genuinely believed she was protecting me right up until Monday morning when I'd showed her those photographs and she'd realized Eleanor had lied about everything. Can we fix this, Dad? Her voice broke. Is there a way to make it right? I'll give back everything. I'll testify against Mom and Arthur. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please tell me there's a way to fix this. I sat silent for a moment, looked at my daughter, 28 years old, tears streaming, genuinely believing I might forgive her, genuinely believing she'd been protecting me, genuinely broken. I thought about 8-year-old Julia sitting on a Mustang hood, asking how engines worked. Can you love someone and destroy them at the same time? Yes, you can sit across a table, watch them cry, feel your heart break for them, and still let the recorder run. That's what justice requires. That's what I'd learned. I love you, I said clearly, for the recording, for her, for myself. That hasn't changed, but what you just said, every word was recorded. Julia didn't understand. What? I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out the recording device, placed it on the white tablecloth between our untouched steaks. Everything. The device was in my pocket the whole time. I watched her face change. Hope to confusion to understanding to horror, all in the space of 3 seconds. She stood, legs shaking so badly she had to grab the table for balance. Left without her purse. Came back 30 seconds later, grabbed it without looking at me, left again. I sat there with cold coffee and 2 untouched steaks, the recording device on the white tablecloth, like evidence of a crime we'd both just committed. She'd confessed to theft and fraud and conspiracy. I'd committed the betrayal of recording my daughter's desperate confession while pretending I might forgive her. Julia left the steakhouse shaking so badly she could barely walk. I sat there with cold coffee and 2 untouched steaks, the recording device on the white tablecloth, between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. Roxanne would have her confession by evening, and I would have to live with the fact that I had chosen evidence over my daughter. But the evidence was only as good as the legal strategy to use it, and that meant turning Julia's confession into leverage against Eleanor and Arthur. Monday morning, 3 days after the steakhouse. My email dinged at 9 with a message from Leo, subject line reading, "Supplemental evidence critical." I opened it. Victor Brennan, 52 years old, Henderson real estate agent. Leo's report identified him as the agent who had handled the Sarah Mitchell mansion, purchased back in August 2023. The all-cash transaction, $890,000. What made this critical, Victor had kept everything, every document, every signature Sarah Mitchell had made during the purchase. Purchase agreement, title transfer, closing documents, escrow papers, 23 separate documents each bearing Sarah Mitchell's signature in multiple locations. Leo had arranged the handwriting analysis, sent copies of Sarah Mitchell's signatures, alongside Eleanor Vance's known signature samples from shop documents I'd signed over the years, invoices, contracts, tax returns. The analysis came back 97% certainty match. Sarah Mitchell and Eleanor Vance were the same person proven by handwriting that couldn't lie the way people could. My phone rang. Roxanne, "You got Leo's email. she asked. Just read it. This is it, Ray. Handwriting evidence locks the identity fraud charge. Combined with Julia's confession, the death certificate fraud, the financial records, we have everything we need for prosecution. When do we move? I'm drafting the filing documents now. Travel ban for Julia, asset freeze for all 3 conspirators, protective orders for remaining shop property. We can file by end of week. How long until... I stopped mid-sentence, looked out my office window at the parking lot. Frank Harrison was driving past in a blue Ford F-150, one of the shop's service trucks we used for parts runs and delivery. I'd bought it 2 years ago, used it myself half the time, except the license plates were wrong. Not the commercial fleet plates I remembered. Regular Nevada plates I didn't recognize. Ray, Roxanne's voice in my ear. You still there? I'll call you back. I hung up, walked out of the office, across the workshop floor, out into the parking lot where Frank was climbing out of the F-150. Frank, I said, those plates on the truck, they're different. He looked uncomfortable, the same look he'd worn for months when he knew something was wrong but didn't want to say it. Julia had me swap them last week, he said. Said something about registration updates. When last week, Thursday I think, maybe Friday, she said it was routine. Cold certainty settled in my chest. Julia wasn't just caught, she was actively liquidating. Building a criminal case is like assembling an engine. Every piece must fit precisely, every connection, verified, nothing left to chance. Victor Brennan's signatures were the last missing gasket in a machine designed to crush Eleanor's lies. But while I'd been building that machine, Julia had been dismantling everything she could still reach. I walked back to my office, pulled open the file cabinet, found the vehicle registration binder I hadn't looked at in months, because Julia handled all the administrative work. The fleet should show 8 vehicles, 5 trucks, 3 sedans. Standard inventory for a shop our size. I flipped through the registration transfers. Blue Ford F-150. Transferred to private buyer April 28th. Signature Julia Vance, authorized agent. Red Chevrolet Silverado. Transferred to private buyer April 30th. Signature Julia Vance, authorized agent. White Dodge Ram. Transferred to private buyer May 2nd. 3 days ago. Signature Julia Vance, authorized agent. 3 vehicles, gone in the past week. Before I reveal exactly how much money Julia had drained in those final days, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think Ray should have moved faster, or B, if gathering all the evidence was the right call, and tell me why in 5 to 10 words. Please note, what follows contains some recreated details for narrative impact. I calculated the approximate value. The F-150, maybe $30,000. The Silverado, $28,000. The Ram, $27,000. $85,000 in assets liquidated, while I'd been methodically gathering evidence and recording confessions. Each transfer showed Julia Vance's signature as authorized agent. Each one used the forged power of attorney she'd admitted to creating. Each one was another felony committed in the week between our office confrontation and this moment. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence while Julia spent those same weeks selling off everything I hadn't already lost. Methodical versus desperate, but desperate moves faster, and I was running out of assets to recover. I called Roxanne back. 3 vehicles, I said when she answered. Gone in the past week, $85,000. Silence on the line. Julia's signature is on every transfer, I continued. Using the forged power of attorney, she's disposing of everything she can reach before you freeze the assets. I'll file the travel ban and asset freeze this afternoon. Emergency motion? Not this afternoon, now. She's liquidating everything. By end of week, there might not be anything left to freeze. Ray, how fast can you move? Give me 2 hours. I'll have the emergency motions filed by noon. Judge can issue temporary orders same day if I argue immediate flight risk and ongoing asset disposal. Do it. I'm on it, stay by your phone. She hung up. I sat at my desk with the vehicle registration binder open, looking at Julia's signatures, authorizing the sale of trucks she had no legal right to touch, using power of attorney she'd admitted on tape to forging. My phone rang again. Leo's number. What now? I answered. We have a problem. His voice was tight, controlled, the tone of someone delivering bad news they wish they didn't have to deliver. What kind of problem? Nadia Cross just hired a lawyer. I went still. When? This morning. Attorney filed notice of representation an hour ago. Nadia's claiming she was coerced into accepting the $50,000, that she didn't understand what it was, for that she wants to cooperate with authorities in exchange for immunity. She's going to talk. Looks that way, and if she talks to the wrong people before we move, Eleanor and Arthur will know we're coming. Roxanne had promised emergency filings by end-of-day travel ban for Julia, asset freeze for all 3 conspirators' protective orders for remaining shop property. But as I hung up with Leo, I understood something with cold certainty. We'd run out of time to be methodical. If Nadia talked before we moved, everything could unravel from the inside. Leo's voice was still in my ear when I understood how fast this was about to happen. We had 24 hours before Nadia Cross's lawyer convinced her to cooperate with authorities, and once she talked, Eleanor would activate the Paraguay escape plan. Nadia hired Gregory Moss, Leo said. His voice had that tight control that meant he was delivering the worst possible news in the calmest possible way. Criminal defense attorney specializing in immunity deals. He's good, really good. And he's already filed notice of representation. When does he advise her to talk? Could be today. Could be tomorrow, but he'll tell her the same thing every defense attorney tells: paid witnesses cooperate early, get immunity, avoid prosecution. Once Nadia gives her statement to the district attorney, the DA has to contact Eleanor and Arthur with questions about the $50,000 payment and Marilyn's body. And once they know they're exposed, Eleanor wires the remaining Paraguay money and disappears within hours. Arthur starts destroying whatever evidence he can still reach. Your window to confront them is closing faster than we planned. I looked at the vehicle registration binder still open on my desk. 3 trucks sold in the past week, Julia liquidating assets in real time while I'd been methodically building a case. How fast can we move? I asked. That's not my call, that's Roxanne's. But Ray, if we're going to do this, we need to do it now. Not Friday, not next week, now. I hung up and drove straight to Roxanne's office. Arrived at 11, walked past the receptionist who waved me through like she'd been expecting me. Found Roxanne in the conference room with Leo, already there, his laptop open, a map of the Henderson area spread across the table. Roxanne stood at the whiteboard, writing a timeline in neat block letters. Asset freeze filing 2 p.m. today. Travel ban filing 3 p.m. today. Emergency judge approval 5 p.m. today. Confrontation tomorrow 9 a.m. Tomorrow, I said, not Friday. Tomorrow morning. Roxanne turned from the whiteboard. Not Friday as we originally planned. Tomorrow before Eleanor or Arthur know the legal net has closed. What about the filings? I file emergency motions this afternoon. Asset freeze for all 3 conspirators, travel ban for Julia, protective orders for remaining shop property. Judge Coleman owes me a favor, he'll sign by 5. By the time you knock on Eleanor's door tomorrow morning, her accounts are frozen, and Julia can't leave Nevada. Leo pointed to the map. Henderson residential area. A red X marked the beige mansion where Eleanor lived with Arthur. I've documented all exits, Leo said. Front door back, sliding glass door, side gate to the driveway. Adjacent properties here and here. Best approach is straight to the front door, 9 a.m., when they're likely both home. I'll be parked 3 houses down, with camera and telephoto lens documenting everything. In case they react violently, Roxanne added, or attempt to flee. Leo captures it, and I have law enforcement on standby with arrest warrants ready to execute. How do you compress a week of preparation into 24 hours? You don't. You trust that the evidence you've already gathered is enough, and accept that hesitation now means losing everything to a woman who's already disappeared once. Walk me through the sequence, I said. Roxanne turned back to the whiteboard, drew a timeline arrow. Asset freeze activates at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Simultaneous across all accounts, Eleanor's, Arthur's, Julia's, and every account Leo identified in the Paraguay transfers. Eleanor won't be able to wire money, withdraw cash, or access anything. She's financially frozen. Travel ban goes into effect same time. Julia's passport is flagged. If she tries to leave Nevada, TSA stops her at the airport. If she tries to drive across state lines, any traffic stop triggers an alert. And then I show up at Eleanor's door. At 9 a.m., you have all the evidence, surveillance photos, bank records, Julia's recorded confession, Victor Brennan's handwriting analysis. You confront Eleanor and Arthur with everything. Make it clear you know about Marilyn Cross, the forged death certificate, the Paraguay account, all of it. What if Eleanor tries to leave? She can't. Her accounts are frozen, her passport is flagged, and Leo will be outside documenting everything. You just need to get her confession on record. Leo looked up from the map. I'll have audio recording equipment in the car. If you can get them talking outside where I can capture it, that's bonus evidence. But the main goal is confrontation documentation and containment. Containment, I repeated. Making sure they understand there's no escape, Roxanne said. No Paraguay, no new identities, no disappearing again. The walls are closing and you're the one showing them exactly how trapped they are. I looked at the timeline on the whiteboard. 24 hours from this moment to tomorrow morning. 1 day to prepare for confronting my wife of 34 years and my best friend of 60 years, with evidence that would send them both to prison. Am I ready for this? I asked. Roxanne looked at me directly. You've been ready since the day you saw her at that restaurant. She was right. The moment I'd heard Eleanor's voice ordering food at that counter, the moment I'd seen the double mole on her right hand, the moment I'd followed the white Ford to Henderson and watched Arthur embrace her on the porch, that was when this became inevitable. Everything since then had just been gathering the tools I needed to dismantle their lies. A mechanic knows when you're racing against time, precision matters more than perfection. Every bolt tightened correctly, every connection verified, every system tested but fast. Tomorrow, I'd dismantle Eleanor's lies the same way under pressure, with no room for mistakes. Asset freeze at 6 a.m. tomorrow, Roxanne said. Travel ban simultaneous. You confront at 9. Leo documents from outside. I'm on standby with law enforcement. Any questions? No. Then get some rest tonight. Tomorrow is going to be the hardest day you've had in a long time. I almost laughed. Rest. As if I could sleep knowing that in less than 24 hours, I'd be standing on Eleanor's doorstep with evidence of our daughter's confession and Arthur's medical fraud and Marilyn Cross's stolen identity. I left Roxanne's office at noon with a map of Henderson, a timeline measured in hours instead of days, and the knowledge that by tomorrow evening, either Eleanor would be in custody or she'd be in Paraguay beyond reach of American law. The machine was ready. The plan was set. All that remained was the execution and one sleepless night before I confronted my wife and my best friend with evidence of their conspiracy. That night, I wouldn't sleep at all. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Gave up trying around 2 in the morning. How do you sleep the night before you walk into a house and destroy everyone you've ever loved? I sat at the bedroom window, watching Las Vegas spread out in the distance, a grid of lights against black desert. Our house in Summerlin sat high enough that on clear nights you could see the strip glowing on the horizon like a distant fire. 34 years with Eleanor. 34 years of marriage can't all be lies. I'd spent weeks believing it could, that every moment, every word, every touch had been calculated performance. But sitting there at 2 in the morning, I knew that wasn't possible. Some of it had to be real. Her laugh at dinner parties when someone told a joke that caught her off guard. The way she'd touch my shoulder passing behind me in the kitchen, casual affection that required no audience. The tears when my father died, the way she'd held me while I tried not to break. The pride in her eyes when we signed the papers on our first branch location, genuine excitement about what we were building together. Those moments couldn't all have been performance. No one sustains that level of acting for 3 decades. Some of the love had to be real, or she couldn't have made the lies work so well, which somehow made the betrayal harder, not easier. Real love twisted into a weapon is worse than love that was never there at all. I shifted my focus to Arthur. 60 years. We'd met in elementary school, worked on our first cars together in his father's garage when we were 16, double dated in high school. He'd been my best man at the wedding, stood beside me at my father's funeral, hand on my shoulder, the same way he'd stand at Eleanor's fake funeral 30 years later. Every memory I had of Arthur was now contaminated by the knowledge that he'd been sleeping with my wife for 2 decades, that he'd signed fraudulent death certificates, that he'd planned her escape while comforting me through grief he'd manufactured. 60 years of friendship. How much of it was real? How much was him waiting for the moment when Eleanor would finally be willing to leave? Then Julia. 28 years from her first breath. I'd taught her to walk, to read, to change oil on a car when she was 12, to balance the shop books when she was 16. Every lesson I'd given her, every skill I'd passed down, she'd weaponized against me. The forged signature she'd practiced for 2 weeks, the accounting knowledge she'd used to hide transfers, the understanding of business operations she'd deployed to sell my branches without triggering alarms. I'd built her into the perfect accountant. She'd become the perfect thief. Which memories are real and which are lies? Does it matter? A mechanic knows a tool that worked perfectly for 30 years, then breaks you is worse than one that never worked at all. At least with broken tools, you throw them away without regret. But I couldn't throw away 34 years with Eleanor, or 60 years with Arthur, or 28 years with Julia. Those decades existed. Those memories were real, even if the people in them had been performing roles I'd been too blind to see. The bedroom was dark except for the city lights through the window. The clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. 6 hours until the confrontation. 6 hours until I walked into that Henderson mansion and showed them everything I knew. My thoughts shifted to someone I'd never met. Marilyn Cross, 67 years old, homeless, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, died alone in a hospice facility where Arthur worked part-time. No one had mourned her real death because everyone thought they were mourning Eleanor. No candles lit with her name, no prayers said for her soul, no funeral attended by people who'd loved her. Just $50,000 paid to her niece for silence, and a body cremated under a false identity while I'd stood beside a closed coffin, speaking words meant for someone else. Marilyn Cross had died thinking she was anonymous, thinking no one would remember her name or care that she'd existed. And for 9 months, she'd been right. I'd knelt before her ashes every morning whispering Eleanor's name. I'd mourned a lie while Marilyn's truth sat in that brass urn, unacknowledged, unmemorialized, unremembered. Revenge is wanting them to hurt the way you hurt. Justice is wanting the truth told and the victim remembered. I'd spent 9 months wanting revenge. But sitting in that dark bedroom, thinking about Marilyn Cross, I understood I was after something simpler. I wanted her name spoken out loud by people who'd tried to erase her. I stood from the window. Tomorrow wasn't about making Eleanor suffer, or watching Arthur lose his medical license, or seeing Julia face criminal charges. Those things would happen. The evidence was too strong, the confessions too clear, the conspiracy too documented. But that wasn't why I was going to Henderson. I was going because Marilyn Cross deserved to have her name spoken in that mansion, in front of the people who'd stolen her death and used it as cover for fraud, in front of Arthur who'd signed the fake certificate, and Eleanor who'd profited from the identity swap, and in front of every conspiracy they had built on Marilyn's anonymous corpse. Someone needed to say her name out loud. Someone needed to remember she'd existed, she'd mattered. She deserved justice even though she was gone. Tomorrow that someone would be me. The clock read 3:24 a.m. I thought about trying to sleep again, dismissed it. Sleep required peace or exhaustion, and I had neither. Just this cold clarity about what tomorrow required and why it mattered beyond my own betrayal. At 4 in the morning, I finally lay down, knowing I wouldn't sleep, but needing to rest my body for what the day would demand. When I walked into that Henderson mansion in 5 hours, I'd carry 3 things with me. Evidence Eleanor couldn't deny. Leo's folder with surveillance photos, bank records, handwriting analysis. Julia's recorded confession, every piece of documentation that proved what they'd done. Truth Arthur couldn't escape. The knowledge that I knew about the fake death certificate, about Marilyn Cross's body, about the hospice facility, where he'd found a convenient corpse to cremate under Eleanor's name, and Marilyn Cross's name on my lips. Let them hear it and know exactly what they had done. Let them understand that their conspiracy hadn't just stolen from me. It had erased a woman who died alone and deserved better than being forgotten. By 9 a.m., I'd be standing at their door. By 9, I was ready. But I waited. The asset freeze needed time to activate across all accounts. The travel ban needed confirmation from TSA. Roxanne called at noon. Everything was in place. Julia couldn't leave Nevada. Eleanor couldn't access her money. The legal net had closed. Though I arrived at Henderson at 3. Arthur Pendleton opened the door, and in 1 second I watched 60 years of friendship die in his eyes. I'd parked the truck 3 houses down at 2:55, walked to the mansion carrying the evidence folder Leo had prepared, rang the doorbell at exactly 3 o'clock. Footsteps inside. The door opened. Arthur stood there in jeans and a polo shirt, home on a Tuesday afternoon, casual, comfortable, living the life he'd built with my wife while I'd mourned a woman who wasn't dead. I watched his face transform in real time, surprise at seeing me on his doorstep, then confusion about why I'd come all the way to Henderson unannounced, then understanding beginning to dawn, then horror, full, complete, absolute horror. Arthur knew why I'd come, knew this day had arrived, had probably been waiting for it, dreading it, hoping it would never happen, but knowing eventually it would. "Ray, what are you..." His voice died mid-sentence. "I need to talk to my wife," I said, calm, direct, the voice of a man stating simple facts. I didn't wait for an invitation, stepped forward into Arthur's personal space. He backed up reflexively, the automatic response of someone who just recognized a threat. I crossed the threshold into the mansion. The smell hit me first, not unpleasant, just familiar in the way houses have distinct scents you don't notice until you've been away from them. I'd surveilled this place from my truck for hours over the past weeks, but I'd never been inside, never smelled the particular combination of coffee and cleaning products and whatever air freshener Eleanor preferred. From deeper in the house came the crash of something dropping, glass shattering on tile, rapid footsteps in the hallway. I kept walking toward the sound. Arthur followed behind me, helpless to stop what was happening, but unable to leave. "You can't just—" "Watch me," I said without turning. The entry opened into a living room, on the right a hallway, straight ahead, leading deeper into the house. The crash had come from that direction. I walked toward it. Eleanor appeared at the hallway's end. Frozen mid-step, face white, one hand braced against the wall for balance. 9 months since I'd seen her at the fast food restaurant. 9 months since I'd followed her here and watched Arthur embrace her on the front porch. Now she stood 15 feet away in the hallway of a house bought with my stolen money, wearing casual clothes, her hair cut in a different style than I remembered, looking exactly like Eleanor, and nothing like the dead woman I'd mourned. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, what I'd say, how I'd say it, what expressions I'd wear. But standing in that hallway watching Eleanor realize her 9 months of freedom were ending, I understood no rehearsal prepares you for the moment lies stop working and truth takes over. I stopped walking, looked directly at her, said one word. Eleanor, her name, not a question, not an accusation, just a fact, a statement of identity, recognition of who she was and what she'd done, and the reality that could no longer be denied. She opened her mouth, closed it. No words came. No denial, no claim of mistaken identity. No performance of a stranger confused by some crazy man who'd broken into her house. No Sarah Mitchell act. No confusion about who I was or why I'd come or what name I'd just spoken. Just silence. And truth hanging in the air between us like something physical you could reach out and touch. Arthur stood behind me, breathing hard. I could hear it in the quiet, the ragged sound of a man whose carefully constructed lie had just collapsed around him. Eleanor's hands trembled at her sides. She was still braced against the wall, still frozen in that moment of being caught, with no escape route and no cover story that would work. For the first time in 9 months, she had no lie to tell, no performance to give, no identity to hide behind. Just Eleanor, just the truth, just the woman who'd faked her death and stolen my money and made me worship an urn of ashes that weren't hers, while she lived in this Henderson mansion with my best friend. What does truth look like when it finally arrives? Like a woman standing in a hallway unable to speak, like silence where lies used to live, like the moment between lightning and thunder when everything waits for the sound that must come. I didn't move closer, didn't need to. The evidence folder was in my hand, unopened, still carrying everything I'd gathered over weeks of investigation, surveillance photos, bank records, Julia's confession handwriting analysis, Leo's documentation of every lie. But I didn't need to open it yet. Because Eleanor's silence was its own confession. The way she stood there unable to deny who she was, the way her hands shook, the way she looked at me with something that might have been fear or guilt or just the recognition that the game was over and she'd lost. No more Sarah Mitchell, no more fake death, no more Paraguay escape plan, just Eleanor Vance standing in a hallway she'd bought, with stolen money caught by the husband she'd tried to erase. Arthur broke the silence first. "Ray, listen." "No," I said, still calm, still controlled. "You listen, both of you." I looked from Eleanor to Arthur and back again. "I know everything, every detail, every lie, every dollar, every document, and I have evidence you can't deny." Eleanor's face somehow went even paler. Eleanor stood in that hallway looking at me, the husband she'd made worship an urn of fake ashes for 9 months, while she lived in this mansion with my best friend and spent my stolen money. She couldn't speak, couldn't deny, couldn't run. For the first time since June 2024, Eleanor Vance had nowhere to hide from the truth, and I had evidence she couldn't escape. I opened the evidence folder on their coffee table. Document by document, I dismantled their conspiracy on the surface of their own furniture, while while they stood watching and calculated how to survive. Living room, I said. Eleanor and Arthur followed me like condemned prisoners walking to execution. Slow steps, bodies tense, already knowing what came next but unable to stop it. I sat on their couch, placed the folder on the coffee table, opened it carefully, methodically, the way I'd open a toolbox before starting a complex repair. Eleanor and Arthur remained standing on the opposite side of the table, close together but not touching, united in their exposure but already separate in their fear. I removed the first items, 3 8x10 photographs Leo had taken, laid them side by side on the polished wood surface. Eleanor entering the Henderson mansion. Date stamp, March 15th, 2025. Clear shot of her face, her clothes, the white Ford in the driveway behind her. Eleanor shopping with Arthur at a grocery store. Date stamp, March 18th, 2025. Both of them visible in frame, Arthur's hand on the shopping cart, Eleanor reaching for something on a shelf. Eleanor at a restaurant. Date stamp, March 22nd, 2025. Sitting across from Arthur at a booth, coffee cup in hand, laughing at something he'd said. 3 photographs, 3 dates, all of them 9 months after her funeral. I didn't explain, didn't need to. Just let them look at the evidence of Eleanor's continued existence captured in professional surveillance photos they had no way to deny. Eleanor's hands shook at her sides. Arthur swallowed visibly. I watched his throat move. What is this? Eleanor's voice broke on the last word. Evidence, I said, calm, flat, the voice of a man presenting facts. I placed the next items. Leo's investigation report. 23 pages documenting the Sarah Mitchell identity created by Lenny Curtis in 2023. Birth certificate, social security card, driver's license, all fabricated, all dated a full year before Eleanor's supposed death. Victor Brennan's real estate documents, the Henderson Mansion purchase agreement, every page showing Sarah Mitchell's signature, every signature analyzed, handwriting match to Eleanor Vance, 97% certainty. Phone records, printed spreadsheets showing 200 calls between Julia's number and various international numbers over 9 months. Country codes rotating Paraguay, Cayman Islands, Panama. Burner SIM cards switched every 2 weeks. Professional operational security that proved coordination planning, systematic conspiracy. Presenting evidence is like assembling an engine in reverse instead of building something that runs. You're showing exactly how the machine of lies was constructed, piece by documented piece, until the criminals can see their own blueprint used against them. Eleanor stared at the phone records. Julia did, I said. I pulled out the final piece. Small digital recorder. The same one Roxanne had given me. The one that had captured Julia's confession at the steakhouse 2 weeks ago. Placed it on the coffee table among the other evidence. Pressed play. Julia's voice filled the living room. Mom came to me 3 years ago. Said if you divorced her, the business debts would destroy you. I thought I was protecting you. Eleanor's face went white. The power of attorney. How many times did you practice my signature? My voice on the recording. Calm, clinical, extracting confession like a surgeon, removing evidence from a crime scene. 2 weeks, every night, until it looked exactly right. Julia crying on the recording, admitting everything. Eleanor's approach, the forged signature, the branch sales, the systematic theft, the $50,000 to Nadia Cross. Every detail of the conspiracy spoken in Julia's own voice, recorded with her knowledge that it would be used against her. Arthur's face transformed as he listened. Understanding dawning that Julia hadn't just been caught. Julia had confessed. Julia had betrayed them completely, turned state's evidence, given me everything I needed to prosecute. The recording ran for 3 minutes. Julia's voice explaining how she'd practiced my signature for 2 weeks, how she'd sold the branch locations, how she'd transferred money in increments designed to avoid detection, how she'd made 200 phone calls to Eleanor using burner SIM cards Leo had tracked anyway, how she'd paid Marilyn Cross's niece $50,000 to stay silent about the body swap. When the recording ended, I pressed stop. Silence filled the living room. I didn't come to argue, I said. I came to show you what I have, and what happens next. Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it. No defense came. No explanation that would work. Julia's confession had already destroyed every possible lie. Arthur just stood there breathing. Then I watched something happen that told me everything I needed to know about their relationship. Eleanor and Arthur exchanged a look. Not fear, not grief, not the desperate connection of lovers caught together facing consequences as one. Pure calculation. I'd imagined Eleanor and Arthur as passionate lovers who couldn't resist each other. That was the story that made sense of betrayal. But watching them calculate survival odds in that living room, I understood they'd never loved each other. They'd just used each other, which meant they'd betray each other the moment it benefited them. Eleanor's eyes asked the question, "Can you get a better deal than me?" Arthur's eyes answered, "I don't know, but I'm going to try." They weren't lovers caught together. They were accomplices calculating individual survival odds, assessing who had more to lose, who could negotiate a better deal with prosecutors, who might betray whom first to save themselves. Their relationship wasn't about love or passion or emotional connection. It was a transaction, always had been. Eleanor needed someone with medical credentials to fake her death. Arthur wanted someone who wasn't his wife. Mutual benefit, mutual use, mutual exploitation. And now that the benefit was ending, so was the alliance. I had one more document in the folder, still folded, still hidden beneath the other papers. The one piece of evidence I'd saved for last because I knew it would split them completely. The Paraguay account. $3.2 million in Eleanor's name only. Not Arthur's, not joint, just hers. Proof that Eleanor had been planning to betray Arthur from the beginning. Planning to take the money and disappear to South America while Arthur stayed behind to face American prosecutors alone. I watched them standing on opposite sides of the coffee table, evidence spread between them like landmines, already calculating individual escape routes instead of defending together as partners. They didn't know I had one more document in that folder, the one that would prove Eleanor had been planning to betray Arthur from the beginning. The Paraguay account would destroy whatever fragile alliance remained. I reached into the folder one last time. The Paraguay account statement felt heavier than paper should feel. $3.2 million. Eleanor's name only, not Arthur's, not a joint account, just hers. I placed it on the coffee table next to the other evidence and watched Eleanor's face drain of color. Arthur picked up the document, read it once, then again, his eyes moving across the text, processing what he was seeing. Account number, bank name, Banco Nacional del Paraguay, Asunción Branch. Account holder, Sarah Eleanor Mitchell. Balance $3,200,000. No second name, no joint ownership, no Arthur Pendleton anywhere on the page. When Arthur looked up at Eleanor, I heard him speak in a voice I'd never heard before. "Sarah?" Eleanor froze. "That's what you told me your real name was, Sarah?" His voice was different. Not the Arthur I'd known for 60 years. Not the compassionate doctor who'd comforted me at my father's funeral. Not the friend who'd stood beside me at my wedding. This was someone else. Someone cold. Someone who'd just discovered he'd been used. Arthur, Eleanor started. $3.2 million in your name. Only your name. I can explain. Were you planning to leave me here? Arthur's voice rose. To disappear to Paraguay while I stayed in Nevada to face the prosecutors alone? Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It wasn't like that, she said finally. Then what was it like? Tell me what this account was for, if not a solo escape plan. Insurance, Eleanor said, in case something went wrong. Insurance? Arthur laughed, sharp, bitter. Insurance for you, not for us. For you. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You were going to take the money and run. Leave me to sign the fake medical records. Leave me to lose my license. Leave me to go to prison while you lived in South America with millions of dollars I helped you steal. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked through the silence. 43 seconds. I counted each one. Outside Henderson's landscaping crew trimmed hedges with electric shears, a distant mechanical buzz that made the silence in this room feel even heavier. My hands rested on my knees, steady, patient, waiting. You signed those papers willingly, Eleanor said. Her voice changed, defensive now, angry. Don't pretend Lenny forced your hand. Lenny, I filed the name away. Lenny Curtis. The forger Leo had identified. Eleanor had just confirmed it without realizing she was giving me additional evidence. I signed them because you told me we were in this together, Arthur said. Because you said we'd disappear together. Because I trusted you. Trusted me. You. Eleanor's laugh matched Arthur's bitterness. The documents are still in your safety deposit box. I made copies, Eleanor. Did you think I'd just trust you? Safety deposit box. Another detail. Another piece of evidence they were handing me while destroying each other. Arthur had kept copies of the forged documents. Probably thought it was insurance against Eleanor betraying him. Never imagined it would become evidence I could use to prosecute them both. You made copies, Eleanor repeated. Of course you did, because you never trusted me either. Apparently with good reason. They stood on opposite sides of the coffee table now. Evidence scattered between them. Photographs, bank records, phone logs, Julia's recorded confession, and now the Paraguay account statement that had destroyed whatever pretense of partnership they had been maintaining. I gave up everything for you, Arthur said. My reputation, my career, my marriage, all of it, for this. He gestured at the evidence. For a woman who was planning to abandon me from the beginning. You gave up nothing, Eleanor shot back. You wanted out of your marriage anyway. You wanted the excitement. You wanted to feel alive again. Don't pretend this was some noble sacrifice. I falsified a death certificate for you. For us. You did it for us. There is no us, there never was. You just used me. And you used me. Don't act innocent. You knew exactly what you were doing when you signed those medical records. When you cremated that woman's body under my name. When you helped me drain Ray's accounts. Marilyn Cross. They still hadn't said her name. Still referred to her as that woman, like she'd been a convenient prop, instead of a person who died alone and deserved better than being erased. I'd built a financial empire on reading people. 37 years watching clients across negotiating tables, learning when confidence was real and when it was performance. Eleanor and Arthur were performing now, but not for me. They'd forgotten I was in the room. Two people who'd planned everything down to the smallest detail, now tearing their own conspiracy apart, because neither had truly trusted the other. I didn't need to say a word. I just needed to let them talk. The recorder in my breast pocket captured every accusation, every admission, every detail they revealed, while trying to hurt each other more than they hurt themselves. 17 minutes. I timed it by the grandfather clock in the corner. 17 minutes of Eleanor and Arthur systematically dismantling the lies they had built together. 17 minutes of mutual accusations that confirmed everything I'd already documented and added details I hadn't known. Lenny Curtis, the forger who'd created the fake documents. Safety deposit box, where Arthur had kept copies of the forged papers. Paraguay account. Eleanor's solo escape plan that proved she'd never intended to share the stolen money. Marilyn Cross's body, used and discarded, and still unnamed by the people who had stolen her death. 17 minutes for a perfectly planned conspiracy to eat itself alive. Then they ran out of words. Arthur stood up. Eleanor stood up. They stared at each other across my coffee table like strangers who just discovered they'd been living parallel lives instead of a shared one. 17 minutes. That's how long it had taken for a perfectly planned conspiracy to eat itself alive. My recorder had captured every word, every accusation, every detail they'd revealed in their anger. I had everything I needed now, almost everything. There was still one question neither of them had answered, and I was about to ask it. The phone rang at 5:47 in the morning, while I was sleeping in an armchair at my auto repair shop, because I couldn't face going home to an empty house. "Ray, it's Roxanne," the attorney said. "The FBI just notified me that Julia was detained at McCarran Airport, trying to board a flight to Buenos Aires with $800,000 in cash." I sat up, my neck stiff from the awkward angle. When security flagged her 20 minutes ago, TSA found the money in 2 duffel bags, 50s and 100s shrink-wrapped. The Henderson Mansion confrontation had ended 12 hours earlier when Eleanor and Arthur finally stopped screaming at each other long enough to realize I'd recorded everything. I'd walked out with 17 minutes of audio that would send them both to prison. Now, Julia had tried to run. "Is she talking?" I asked. "Lawyered up immediately," Roxanne said. "But the money tells its own story. We're executing warrants on her house and the Henderson properties within the hour." I stood and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gray. Somewhere out there, my daughter was sitting in a holding cell, and I'd put her there. "There's more," Roxanne continued. "Eleanor and Arthur were stopped at a real estate office in Summerlin 90 minutes ago. They were trying to liquidate one of the Henderson rental properties using false identification documents. That twisted the knife deeper. Even after I'd confronted them, even after they knew I had evidence, they'd still tried to grab what they could before running. The Paraguay account might have been Eleanor's solo escape plan, but Arthur had his own backup strategy. What names were they using? I asked. Sarah Caldwell and Michael Romano. The forger did quality work we're running prints now to confirm it's Lenny Curtis like your recording indicated. I thought about the safety deposit box Arthur had mentioned during the argument. Eleanor had screamed at him for keeping the forged documents instead of destroying them. That mistake would cost them both. Ray, you still there? Roxanne asked. Yeah, what happens now? Arraignments later today. All 3 of them. The U.S. attorney wants to move fast given the flight risk. Julia with the cash, Eleanor with the Paraguay account, Arthur with the fake IDs. You'll need to give a formal statement this afternoon. The door chimed. Frank stepped inside, 2 coffee cups in his hands. I heard the news, he said, simply handing me one. Thought you might need this. We sat on the old bench near the hydraulic lift. Frank didn't fill the quiet with useless words, that's why I'd always valued him. He just sat there drinking his coffee, being present. I destroyed my family, I finally said. Frank turned to look at me. His expression was serious the way it got when he was about to say something he'd thought through carefully. No, Ray, they destroyed themselves. You just refused to be their next victim. She's my daughter. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that exposing Julia, turning over evidence, recording Eleanor and Arthur's confession, that all of it had been justice rather than revenge. But sitting there in the early morning light, all I felt was hollow. The Paraguay account had $3.2 million in it, I said. Eleanor's name only, not joint, not Arthur's. She was going to leave him too. Frank whistled low. Thieves don't trust thieves. They tore each other apart last night. 17 minutes of them blaming each other, revealing details they'd kept hidden. I just sat there with my phone recording while they destroyed themselves. Smart, Frank said, but it hadn't felt smart. It had felt like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing I'd caused it by showing Eleanor that bank statement. The entry twist had been the Paraguay account revealing her solo escape plan. The exit twist had been their recorded argument exposing evidence I hadn't even known to look for Lenny Curtis, the safety deposit box, the forged documents. You know what the worst part is? I asked. The question hung in the air, a pattern interrupt that Frank didn't try to answer. I won. I got everything I wanted, evidence, confessions, justice. And it feels like I lost everything that mattered. Frank stood and put his hand on my shoulder. You'll get through this, one day at a time, just like we did after your real wife died. Marilyn. Her name was Marilyn Cross, and someone had cremated her body under Eleanor's name. That question from last night at the mansion still didn't have an answer. Whose grave was really whose, and what had they done with Marilyn's remains? Frank, I said quietly, there's something else I need to do, something I should have done 6 months ago. He looked at me waiting. I need to find out where Marilyn really is. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table. The morning sun coming through the window felt too bright. You're certain? The room tilted slightly. What? Arthur planted that urn. It's a prop. We don't even know whose ashes are inside, if there are any at all. Could be fireplace ash for all we know. I looked through the doorway at the living room. The urn sat on its small altar table where I'd placed it 9 months ago. Flowers on either side, a framed photo of Eleanor smiling. I'd knelt there every morning, talking to her, apologizing for not being a better husband, asking forgiveness for things I'd never actually done wrong. I've been praying to a lie, I said quietly. Leo didn't argue. We spoke for another 10 minutes, details about Arthur's falsified paperwork, Marilyn's actual death date in June 2024, the trail that led to Nadia Cross disappearing from all records after her mother entered the facility. When we hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen for a long time. Then I walked into the living room and stood before the altar. The urn was brass expensive looking, with Eleanor's name engraved on a small plaque. I'd chosen it from a catalog Arthur had provided, picked out the flowers for the service, written a eulogy for a woman who was alive and counting stolen money. Every gesture had been choreographed, and I'd performed exactly as they had wanted. I reached out and lifted the urn. It was heavier than I expected, cold metal in my hands, smooth and impersonal. I carried it to the coffee table and set it down, then removed the flowers, the photo, and the small altar cloth. The space on the table looked empty now. No one was worshipped here anymore. That afternoon, I met Victor Brennan at a downtown cafe he'd suggested. Victor Brennan was the real estate agent who'd processed the Henderson estate transfers 40-something. With genuine regret in his eyes and a leather portfolio he set carefully on the table between us. He'd called 2 days after the arrests, asked to meet in person. I had no idea what they were doing, he said, sliding the folder across to me. These are all the transaction records, everything I have. Property transfers, title searches, escrow documents. I opened the folder. Page after page of Eleanor and Arthur's shell game, moving Henderson's properties through fake entities laundering money, through rental income, building their escape fund, one transaction at a time. You didn't know, I said. That matters. I should have asked more questions. Victor's handshake when we'd met had been firm, honest, nothing like Arthur's soft-palmed grip at the funeral. The fees were good. I didn't look past them. You're looking now? He nodded. The FBI already has copies, but I wanted you to have them too. You deserve to know someone chose your side. I'd knelt before that urn every morning for 9 months, speaking to ashes that were never Eleanor's. But sitting across from Victor Brennan, a stranger with no obligation except his own conscience, I felt something shift. Not everyone had betrayed me. Not everyone was complicit. 2 days later, Chloe Bennett showed up at my auto shop. Chloe Bennett stood in my workshop doorway at 26 years old, Julia's ex-girlfriend, with nothing to gain by being here except a clear conscience. I recognized her from photos Julia had shown me before I knew my daughter was a thief, when I'd thought maybe she'd found someone decent. Julia and I are done, Chloe said without preamble. I should have said something months ago. Frank had stepped away to give us privacy, but I could feel him hovering near the office protective. You don't owe me anything, I said. What they did to you was wrong. Her voice was steady, clear. I knew Julia was hiding money. I didn't know how much or where it came from, but I knew, and I didn't ask. That makes me complicit. You're not. I should have been braver. She met my eyes. The FBI contacted me last week. I told them everything I knew. I'll testify voluntarily if they need me. You need to know someone chose your side. The same words Victor had used. When did doing the right thing become so rare that a 26-year-old stranger felt like a miracle? That evening, I stood in my living room with the urn on my coffee table. The brass caught the sunset coming through the window, turning it almost golden. Inside might be ash, might be nothing, might be someone I'd never met. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the woman whose name had been stolen, whose daughter had been erased, whose existence Arthur had tried to delete completely. Marilyn Cross, I said aloud to the empty room. I will find out what flowers you liked. My voice sounded strange speaking to a stranger, but it felt more honest than the months I'd spent talking to Eleanor's ghost. You deserve better than being erased, better than having some imposter steal your name, your husband, your whole life. I touched the urn gently. I'll make sure someone remembers your real name. I'll place a proper tombstone, and I'll find your daughter Nadia wherever Arthur hid her. 2 people with no family obligation, Victor and Chloe, had chosen integrity over convenience. They'd restored something I'd thought was gone forever, the belief that human decency still existed somewhere in the world. I made that promise to Marilyn Cross, standing in my living room with an urn full of lies on my coffee table. Finding out what flowers she liked would mean tracking down her daughter Nadia, the one person Arthur had erased even more thoroughly than Marilyn herself. And I knew exactly where to start looking. I found Nadia Cross through Leo's records living in Reno, under her married name. She agreed to meet after the trial. First, though, I had to sit through what came next. My daughter stood in Clark County District Court on a September morning and agreed to testify against the people she'd conspired with to destroy me. Judge Margaret Holbrook presided with steel-gray hair and 30 years on the bench reading every scheme Las Vegas could produce. She looked at Julia, over reading glasses, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. Ms. Vance, do you understand the terms of this plea agreement? The judge asked. You will provide full testimony and evidence against Eleanor Vance and Arthur Pendleton in exchange for a reduced sentence on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. I do, Your Honor, Julia said. Her voice was steady, professional. She didn't look at me. And you accept these terms voluntarily? I do. The court accepts the plea. Julia sat down at the defense table. Eleanor and Arthur sat at their own table, 15 feet away, both in dark suits, both staring straight ahead. My daughter had just agreed to help convict the people who'd helped her steal from me. One betrayal stacked on another, and I sat in the gallery watching it all play out like a stranger's story. The The prosecutor called me to the stand an hour later. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat in the wooden witness chair. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. No dramatic high ceilings or grand architecture, just a functional space where justice happened or didn't. I looked at Judge Holbrook, not at Eleanor or Arthur. "Mr. Vance," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your business." "And what happened to that business?" "They took everything I built over 34 years. I kept my voice level. $12.5 million stolen through forged power of attorney documents, fake medical declarations, and identity fraud. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline. Eleanor faking her own death using Marilyn Cross's body, the fake funeral, the systematic theft from my accounts, while I grieved a shadow built entirely on corporate and personal deception. I answered each question clearly, factually, without emotion. The truth didn't need drama. "Mr. Vance, is there anything else you'd like the court to know?" I looked at Judge Holbrook directly. "There's one more name that needs to be in this record, Marilyn Cross." The courtroom was quiet. I paused. Eleanor Vance took her place, stole her identity, and buried her under a false name. Marilyn Cross deserves to be remembered in this proceeding. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," the prosecutor said quietly. I stepped down from the witness stand and walked past Eleanor. Our eyes met for 1 second. No words, no anger, just one look, acknowledging what was and what was gone. She stared ahead again, face blank. Whatever had been between us, real or imagined, was finished. My voice didn't shake when I said Marilyn Cross's name in that courtroom. Victor Brennan testified next, his leather portfolio open on the witness stand rail. The client identified herself as Sarah Mitchell. Victor said, pointing to a real estate contract. She provided identification signed documents and completed the Henderson property transfer on March 15th. The prosecutor held up a comparison document. "Do these signatures match?" "Yes, these signatures match the forged documents already in evidence." "And when did you learn the identity was false?" "When Mr. Vance contacted me after the arrests. I had no idea until then." Victor's voice carried genuine remorse. "I should have verified more thoroughly." Eleanor's attorney didn't cross-examine. What could he ask? The signatures were there, the false identity documented, the property transfers complete. Chloe Bennett took the stand after the afternoon recess. She wore a simple gray suit and spoke clearly, looking at the judge, not at Julia. "Julia mentioned transferring large amounts," Chloe said. "She said it was inheritance money, but the amounts kept changing. 20,000 one week, 50 the next. I knew something was wrong." "Did you ask her about it?" "Once. She told me it was complicated family business and I should stay out of it." Chloe's hands were steady on the rail. "I should have pushed harder." Lenny Curtis was a nervous 50-year-old forger, testifying under immunity deal, avoiding eye contact with Eleanor throughout. He fidgeted with his tie, answered questions in short sentences, confirmed what we already knew. "Eleanor Vance paid me $35,000 to forge medical power of attorney documents," Lenny said. "Also, death certificates, property transfer authorizations, and identity documents for someone named Sarah Caldwell." "How many documents total?" 47 over 18 months. The prosecutor introduced Leo's forensic documentation, death records, facility logs, cremation reports, financial audits, then the Paraguay bank statements showing Eleanor's solo escape account, then my recording of the Henderson Mansion argument, where Eleanor and Arthur destroyed each other's credibility. 7 testimonies, 400 pages of documentation, 17 minutes of recorded confession. Arthur's attorney tried to argue. Coercion claimed the recording was obtained improperly. Judge Holbrook reviewed the circumstances and ruled it admissible. Eleanor's attorney argued mistaken identity suggested someone had impersonated his client. The prosecutor showed fingerprint matches, DNA evidence, and Eleanor's own recorded voice. By 4:30, the testimony phase was complete. I sat in the witness area, listening to the judge summarize the evidence for the record. Her voice was measured professional, reciting facts that represented my destroyed life, like they were items on a grocery list. But when she said Marilyn Cross's name, actually spoke it aloud, and wrote it in her notes, something settled in my chest. I heard the judge's pen scratch across paper as she wrote Marilyn Cross into the official record. 34 years I'd built an empire. 6 months they'd tried to destroy it. Now a judge's pen was writing the truth that couldn't be erased. But the trial was only half of what needed finishing. The sentencing phase transformed the courtroom from a place of public reckoning into an administrative assembly line of consequences. Judge Margaret Holbrook did not look up from her paperwork. As she read the penalties, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls with clinical detachment. "Eleanor Vance," the judge announced. "On the counts of identity fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and grand larceny, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal custody. This court also mandates a permanent injunction barring you from any future employment within the financial services sector." Eleanor stood rigid beside her counsel. The tailored navy suit she wore suddenly looked like an armor that had failed. She stared blindly at the dark wood of the defense table, her jaw set tight, refusing to glance toward the gallery. "Arthur Pendleton." Judge Holbrook continued shifting a fresh stack of documents. "For medical record falsification, fraudulent death certification, and felony conspiracy, you are sentenced to 6 years in federal custody. Furthermore, a copy of this judgment will be forwarded immediately to the Nevada State Board of Medical Examiners to initiate the permanent revocation of your medical license." Arthur's posture collapsed slightly. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning a brittle white as his legal representation whispered a useless reassurance into his ear. The prestigious career he had weaponized to exploit the system was gone in a single breath. "Julia Vance," the judge said, her sharp eyes finally lifting to look directly at my daughter. "For your role in embezzlement, forgery, and wire fraud, you are sentenced to 4 years in federal custody. The court notes your substantial cooperation with the federal prosecution and your crucial testimony against your co-conspirators. Consequently, you will be eligible to petition for parole after serving 2 years." Julia nodded once a brief mechanical movement. She stood straight in her dark blazer, her face an unreadable mask of exhaustion. The court further orders full restitution in the amount of $12.5 million to be paid to the victim, Raymond Vance, jointly and severally by all 3 defendants. Judge Holbrook declared, striking her gavel with a sharp final thud. "Asset seizures and federal liens against all identified properties, domestic accounts, and global transfers will commence immediately. Court is adjourned." The courtroom emptied quickly, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning. I walked out into the bright Las Vegas sun. The weight of $12.5 million returned to me, carrying no warmth. 1 week later, the designer clothes were gone, replaced by the stark reality of institutional gray. I sat across from Julia in the visitation room of the federal detention facility, separated by a scratched metal table bolted firmly to the concrete floor. She wore standard orange scrubs, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, stripped entirely of the curated professional persona she had maintained at the shop. We sat in a heavy, unbroken silence for several minutes. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. "I know you can't forgive me, Dad," Julia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect you to." "No," I replied flatly. "I can't. I let Mom convince me that we were protecting the business," she said, a solitary tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. "But I knew the numbers were wrong. I knew what I was doing to you every time I altered those ledgers." I looked at the stranger sitting across from me, the daughter I had raised to respect precision and truth, now broken by her own calculations. "I cannot offer you forgiveness, Julia," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I will not abandon you to this place. I will return next month." A genuine look of surprise crossed her face before she nodded silently. I stood up, signaled the guard at the door, and walked away from the table without looking back. Justice had been executed, but the void left behind could not be filled by a judge's order. The restitution funds cleared in October, but wealth without purpose is just a heavy anchor. I structured the capital with clinical precision. $7 million went into conservative investments to secure a quiet existence, while $3 million remained untouched in savings. Resolving the lingering weight of the fraud, I anonymously distributed $500,000 across 3 organizations dedicated to supporting elderly victims of financial exploitation. It wasn't an act of charity. It was a necessary rebalancing of an unfair world. By November, I relocated to a 900-square-foot cottage in Boulder City. I converted the garage into a woodworking shop, replacing the chaotic hum of hydraulic lifts with the rhythmic, predictable scratch of hand saws. Wood didn't forge signatures. Joinery didn't plot escapes. Every morning at 6:30, I stepped into the scent of sawdust and oil, focusing entirely on the physical reality of creation. Marilyn Cross's granite headstone was quietly set in place on a crisp Saturday morning. Standing before the marker, I realized justice is not merely punishing the guilty, it is restoring dignity to the erased. I left her to rest under her true name, closing that final painful chapter. Julia's first letter arrived shortly after written from prison. She detailed her enrollment in a forensic accounting program, mapping a path to use her shattered skills for tracking systemic fraud. I placed the pages in my desk drawer without replying. The door wasn't locked, but I wasn't ready to walk through it. Now I run a hand over the smooth arm of a cherrywood chair, commissioned by a local teacher. The joint is seamless, held together by patience and raw structural integrity. At 71, my empire is gone, but peace has taken its place. This simple, honest work is finally enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this trust is the most valuable thing you can give someone, and the most devastating thing to lose. Looking back, I see the warning signs I ignored, small inconsistencies in Eleanor's stories, questions I didn't ask because I didn't want to doubt the person I loved. Don't make my mistake. When something feels wrong, trust that instinct. I spent 34 years building a life on lies because I chose comfort over truth. That choice cost me everything. This family betrayal taught me something I never expected, that you can survive losing everything and still find peace. Family story after family story I've heard since, and they all share one truth. The people closest to us can hurt us deepest, but they can't take who we choose to become after. I believe God allowed this family betrayal to show me what really mattered, not the money or business, but choosing integrity when everyone around me chose deception. That's the lesson worth keeping from this family story. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment below. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find your way through it? And if you think someone needs to hear this, please share it with them. Subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories about choosing integrity when life tests everything you believe in. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. One last note. Parts of this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes, but the lesson about integrity, betrayal, and choosing who you become in the face of devastation is absolutely real.